Welcome to another edition of Flashback to the Track. As always, it is presented to you by Blue Emu. It provides you with maximum strength relief for your tired muscles and joints. Just tired, you just give them some maximum strength relief. I'm James, that's Mark. Not a bird, but if you're a bird, I'm a bird.
Birds aren't real. Join them.
A beautiful movie.
Thank you to Blue Emu, of course. And James, it's going to be a fun week on the Flashback to Trap podcast because we are talking about a very interesting and polarizing topic in the motorsports community.
Topic? I think it's several topics.
It's several topics.
Yeah, there are conspiracy theories, and that exists outside of motorsports. I mean, conspiracy theories are everywhere. Like, if you're like me, I think the moon landing actually happened. I believe that conspiracy. I don't know about you, but I believe that it did happen. But there are conspiracy theories that even exist in the world of motorsports. It doesn't matter whether it's NASCAR, Formula One, IndyCar, anywhere, even drag racing. Conspiracy theories exist. And I think a big part of conspiracy theories existing, first off, it definitely exists around a lot of manipulation, whether that be manipulation by like a sanctioning body, a manufacturer, another team or organization within itself manipulating things. You know, there is always that feeling that there are things out of our control that we just have to believe existed for us not to get an outcome that we wanted. You know, Mark, like, I feel like that's a big reason why a lot of fans so passionately get caught up in conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it's especially in any sport, there's always going to be people that think that outcomes were manipulated by usually the sanctioning body. And you'll get that in the NFL. Oh, that was a bad flag. That wasn't actually a penalty, but they didn't want that team to win. You know, and I've been caught up in some myself, you know, being like, that had to be fixed. There's no way. But then you look at the evidence and you're like, well, think about all the people that would have had to keep quiet. And you're like, is that really a thing? But yeah, being a Robbie Gordon fan for years, of course, I thought the series was out to get him. Like, he got harsher penalties than everyone else and he got screwed on stuff. So yeah, but then you look back at it and it's like, no, it's just how it was. But yeah, conspiracy theories are interesting, how people really get wrapped up in them and they start to believe them. And the internet's obviously helped that a lot. People can always get on and discuss these things. So really the genesis of this episode is I did a thread a few weeks ago on my Twitter account and I asked people, what's your favorite motorsports conspiracy? And I think I got about 150 replies, and some of them were really interesting, and a lot of them appear in this thread. Most of them were mentioned multiple times. So some that a few people, you know, really think are true, and there was a few that aren't included that were so outlandish that I was like, nah, I'm not even going to bother researching that. So yeah, really looking forward to discussing these different conspiracies. So we'll give you a bit of a background on each one. We'll talk about supporting evidence and the evidence to debunk it, and then we'll just kind of get our thoughts on it and see what we think. Because, you know, there's a few on this list that I subscribe to the conspiracy theory. So
yeah, and just to note, these are conspiracy theories that neither Mark or I truly just believe in. A lot of these are fan threads that are put up on here. So yeah, I mean, if a fan submitted it on Twitter, that's where we're getting these from. I don't know about you, Mark. I try to have a very unbiased view of things. Obviously, you really can't in times because there's always a biased side of yourself that comes into play, like parents trying to pick their favorite kid. It's impossible. So with that too, like, you know, there are some things that, like, you know, I would subscribe to that aren't on this list, but like, you know, I think the biggest thing I want to preach to people from the start is to have all the evidence be laid out in front of you, and then for you to make an educated decision. Don't just like make a knee-jerk reaction when you hear something or read something, especially with the internet nowadays and the legitimacy of things not really being as valid as they should be. So make sure you have all the evidence out in front of you, then make an educated decision. So yeah, that's what we did. We took some things people said to Mark on Twitter. Well, he did, and then he really kind of flushed them out and put some more forethought into it to really explain it. So let's get started with the first one. This dates back to 2001 and the Pepsi 400. Obviously, 2001 was a very hard year for NASCAR. In the Cup Series, they lost their greatest driver, their lead driver, the face of the sport at the time, Dale Earnhardt, on the last lap of the 2001 Daytona 500. And now that death shocked the motorsports world. And if there's anything that came from that death, was the innovation of safety. Though it wasn't all there, and there were some pieces that still had to come in after the passing of Blaze Alexander, which still just scratches my head at that time period. That it took to Blaze for everyone to realize that Han's devices were important. But that's not what we're talking about here. Obviously, with the passing of Dale Earnhardt, it meant that this crowd, this fan base, this magnifying glass now was put onto Dale Earnhardt Jr. So he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders now, coming into the weekend where he goes and has to compete on the same track that took his father's life just like 4 months earlier. Now, during this race, Junior had a rocket ship. His car was just doing things that you couldn't imagine a car to be doing in a stock car racing series. I mean, he would suck up on cars so fast, he'd pass other cars so fast, and that made a lot of people question the legitimacy of his race car. Specifically, competitors like Jimmy Spencer have gone on record saying that there was manipulation. Johnny Benson bit his tongue, smart man, but he did hint at the way that 8 car was performing out on track, and it wowed him. So here's the conspiracy theory, or basically the fan thought theory. Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s car was so cheated up that NASCAR knew about it, and they didn't care. Now, there is quite a lot of supporting evidence to this, and I think a lot of it has come to light, especially from the Dale Jr. download episode, Mark, recently with Jimmy Spencer, because we all know in 1993, that's when Spencer won, correct?
94, when he won the 2 races in the McDonald's
94.
car.
Yeah, for Junior Motors, for not Junior Motorsport, for Junior Johnson Motorsports. Those cars were cheated up, like of the time period, and the manipulation, the gray area within the rule that you could go into, and NASCAR really just couldn't do anything in the moment, but you knew the next week there would be a new rule that painted that gray area, and it just really closed up the competition gap. I mean, that competition gap was still pretty wide open in this era of in the early 2000s. Like, you could really find gray areas in the rules. And as we've noted too in one of our videos, the team was in an alliance. Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, Andy Peachy Racing, Richard Childress Racing. It made DAR, or in the better acronym, RAD, the Super Speedway alliance that just had one sole objective of winning super speedway races. Those cars were all fast that night. And who pushed Dale Earnhardt Jr. to the lead? Well, the pack, but Michael Waltrip got in right behind him. And when those 2 cars were out front, it's pretty hard to really beat them. So, Mark, other than those points, what other supporting evidence is there to kind of add fuel to this conspiracy now that people think that NASCAR knew about a cheated up car that Dale Earnhardt Jr. drove to victory?
So it's funny you actually mentioned the Jimmy Spencer thing, because that's another conspiracy theory that I didn't include, that NASCAR wanted that McDonald's car to win twice in 1994 so McDonald's would stay in the sport. That's actually another one, but we didn't include that one. But yeah, so Jimmy Spencer is involved in conspiracy of his own. He's going to call other people out. The supporting evidence is essentially that people believe that the reason that NASCAR would be okay with like a cheated up car was so it would be a great feel good story that Earnhardt Jr. would win, and that would be featured on the news and everything, and that it would help ratings, right? And there is evidence to support that. So ratings skyrocketed in 2001 over the year 2000. So ratings were way up at the end of the season. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but the ratings were up by a lot. And like I said, it's just an incredible feel-good story. It was on every morning news station, on Good Morning America, everything, and everyone had an interest now in NASCAR and thought that that was really cool. So that really is the evidence to say that maybe NASCAR was okay with an illegal car, or maybe they just didn't look that closely at the 8 car in inspection.
Yeah, I I don't know. I doubt that, because I just feel like where Richard Childress, Andy Petrie, and Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, those three teams were, it just doesn't support that. I just would say those cars were just by far better than other speedway cars, because they had a specific program towards speedway cars. And even in the late 90s, teams like Roush wouldn't care about their speedway program. So like when you have the competition gap like this already, and then you further invest and everyone's still playing catch up, I think that disparity was exemplified on track. Now the ratings, yeah, I mean that just went up. I mean, Mark, we can't explain that.
Well, the ratings went up just like after Dale Earnhardt's death in general. Like people started tuning in, and there was an interest in NASCAR again. So
well, that's what I was going to say. Another generation came into the sport, and that was my generation, really. I mean, our generation. We came in during the post Dale Earnhardt era. We didn't see Dale Earnhardt really race on track. I remember watching a couple of races, but I wouldn't say I watched week in and week out and saw number 3. Like, my time as a NASCAR fan was post Dale Earnhardt on track. And of course, we all know that Dale Earnhardt Jr. was definitely a face to gravitate towards. Younger, more vibrant guy. Also, there was Jeff Gordon. But just think of the next year, too, how we had Ryan Newman, Kevin Harvick come in as a second-year driver, more solidified. But then you also had Jimmy Johnson. Kurt Busch is more defined now. These faces, week in and week out, are actually being name dropped. And then it becomes this narrative of the young and up-and-coming drivers versus the wily old veterans. And I feel like that narrative also helped fuel it. But yeah, there were a lot of feel-good stories in 2001. I don't think that Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s specific win was that. But I feel like Dale Earnhardt's death catapulted the sport into another level of pop culture relevancy. I mean, for Dale Earnhardt to be the only driver to ever been on the cover of Time magazine, the only NASCAR affiliated person, just spoke to what that meant in not only to the sport but to the country. And I feel like, yeah, there was probably like that moment of rekindlance for a lot of the older guards, but I feel like the biggest push was that next generation of fans was starting to get in. And obviously that generation of fans is also kind of like split, and that's why we also see the rating splits today. Mm-hmm. Like, it's because people like us have tuned out.
Well, we also don't watch on TV either. Like, I don't have cable.
Oh, yeah.
So like, that's the other thing too, is like my viewership doesn't get counted because I stream. So
yeah, and I stream on Hulu, so I don't know if that really even counts either, unless it goes into like the network viewership through Nielsen, which is it's a dead old system by
yeah. I used to do rating reports for the Canadian Football League, and the way they do ratings, it's not super accurate. I'll be honest with you. No. It's an estimate.
Yeah.
So
and that's the thing too. It's like when you're like basing it off of like whatever number you're basing it off of, that's a statistic based off of a 30-year-old statistic and a way of measurement. It just doesn't help it really understand how many people are truly tuning in, what the age group that's tuning in is, and how long they're tuning in for. I think that's the big thing. We got to learn like when's the drop off, because like there's always like tune in time when the green flag drops and people are tuning in, and tune out time, which is anywhere in between like halfway and beyond to the reinitial tune back in time when they're catching the checkered flag, because that's all people care about. It's the start and the finish. Everything else in between can be covered by highlights, which kind of sucks. And I think that's also too something that's magnified this story. If you look at the way NASCAR presents this, and I can understand some fans like saying it, I'm going to be straight. I don't think this conspiracy is worth like the paper it's written on, and Mark, you typed it. So
agreed. Like this is just ridiculous. Like there's no way they fixed the race so Dale Earnhardt Jr. would win. Like they had opposing evidence. They had the best cars they finished 1-2 in the 500 that year.
Yeah.
just in reverse order. So like, yeah, they had the best cars. Like
Rad car won at Talladega.
yeah, and that's the thing,
And
right?
yeah,
So
and
it's not
Junior was strong there
outlandish
too.
that this would
No.
happen. And then also, like, the biggest piece of opposing evidence that you can kind of bring up for any conspiracy theory is there's no proof. Like that's the and but that's, you could say that's a shallow argument,
Well,
but there's
here's that slight proof is when we look back at this point in history, where does the highlight reel start? It starts with Alan Bestwick, talking about Junior moving through the pack on that final restart. It's probably with like 6 laps to go.
so what you're saying is Alan was in on it. They were all in on it.
No, Alan just
Alan
made some
Bestwick's a
amazing
Freemason.
calls.
We're gonna find out.
No. But I guess I'm trying to say with that is like NASCAR likes to show when Junior muscled his way to the front and got to the front. They don't like to mention that Tony Stewart got black flag for driving below the yellow line, who was someone who could have easily have taken the win away from Junior. I mean, he probably would have been public enemy number 1, but what else is new for Tony Stewart at that point? He was a hothead in the sport. Johnny Benson easily could have won that race. He had one of the best cars. Like that Pontiac number 10 was one of his statistic best race car he ever drove. So much so that he had it crushed up into a little cube, and he uses it as a coffee table now. That's how much he loved that race car. There's 2 contenders that one got knocked out because of the going below the yellow line. The other one just lost his help because Tony Stewart was probably his best chance to get up there. And he wasn't too shabby too, because he had Hendrick horsepower at that time. But still, NASCAR just loves to show that last little bit and only show that part of Junior winning. And that's enough for some people to just go like, yeah, NASCAR's manipulating this too, even to this day. And it's like, calm down.
Yeah.
Like,
well, in the
that's
end,
just where Alan made his most iconic call. Like straight up,
history is written by the winners, James. So, that's what we remember. We remember that part. And we could do a breakdown of any race and be like, well, the only reason this happens is because, well, this guy was taken out. And we've done that. We've done that on this podcast. That's what the podcast is about. That's what we do, right? We look back at those things. So the one other thing I kind of want to mention before we jump to the next one is we should have mentioned this kind of in the intro, is like James said that make sure you have all the information. And that's very true. So there's 3 questions you'd always ask yourself when looking at a conspiracy theory. And one is there another plausible explanation? Right? It's the first thing you should ask yourself. 2, Occam's razor. Simplest solution is usually the correct one. 2, what do the experts say? And 3, how plausible is this a conspiracy, like in a practical matter? Like, is that plausible? Could they have fixed the race? And think of the amount of people that would have to stay quiet to this day with no one ever saying anything. That's a lot, right? So we kind of have to put that in all of them. But we'll jump to the next one now. And now this one is very recent. It's very controversial. We're going to talk about NASCAR's Championship 4. So if you're not familiar with NASCAR's playoff format, so the final race works like this. So four drivers are eligible for the title in the final race. Whichever one of them finishes the highest in the race wins the championship. All the other drivers are still there fighting for the race win and a good finish, but only those 4 guys can claim the titles, or I should say drivers, not guys. Since the system was implemented in 2014, the eventual Cup Series champion has won the final race every season. So what is the conspiracy theory? Well, many fans believe that the championship 4 cars are cheated up or given leeway in technical inspections, so they are dramatically faster than the rest of the 40-car field. So theory essentially states that NASCAR wants the winner of the championship to also be the race winner for a variety of reasons, makes for a simpler broadcast, etc. So that's the conspiracy theory, James. Why don't we go into some of the supporting evidence of this?
Well, if you look at the championship format, the championship has only been won every year since 2007 with the driver winning the final race. Since 2014 with the driver winning the final race. Of course, there was always an exception every time we went to Homestead. Mark, his name was Kyle Larson. I feel like throughout the race, he was one of the most dominant cars. He just could never close it out. And he could have always played spoiler to this scenario happening. Another thing is, if you watch all these races, it's really clear that the top 4 cars at times are in another zip code. At times. Just bear with us there. When you watch these races, not at every point in the race is a championship 4 car at the front and checking out or in the top 4 positions, but at times, yeah, they have their moments. If you look at a simpler broadcast, that makes the viewer only have to pay attention to the narrative of the championship, it makes sense to have the top 4 cars be the fastest 4 cars, therefore being in the top 5 all the time or in the top 10, rather than scanning through the field and doing a normal broadcast where you're trying to also chase the narrative of a race win as well as the championship. For some people, simpler fans, this makes a lot of sense. That's why it supports that theory and why this is somewhat legitimately plausible. But really, the big thing is team members also have to admit to something happening. All right, you have to have like crew chiefs, car chiefs being able to come out after the fact, after they've won the championship, be like, yeah, we did this, and that, because like we've said before, whenever NASCAR finds that you're playing in the gray area, normally when you come back, the gray area is not there anymore and it's painted to be within the rules. So those are some points that I all got to say are just BS. Cause like, come on, like I get it. I get like the race is better if you're just watching the top 4, but this is racing. You know, the top 4 cars aren't always going to be the best 4 cars that are going to win the championship. And my biggest case in point that made it the most entertaining of races, 2 case in points. You have the 1992 Hooters 500, regarded as the greatest race in NASCAR history. Who won that race? Bill Elliott. Who won the championship? Alan Kawicki. That duel between those 2 drivers made it so much better. But the counterbalance, and here's the other case in point. 2011, when Tony Stewart won the championship, had to win the race, had to beat Carl Edwards, and he did both. Now that was big. The year before, I believe Carl won the championship, or Carl won the race, and Jimmy won the championship. And Mark, if that wasn't the most confusing burnout segment ever in NASCAR, where you had the race winner doing his burnouts, but then you also had the championship doing his burnout. So that was kind of weird. It does support why fans would like to see the simpler one, but then I also like to see the juxtaposition. I like to see that there are 2 winners. There's the season-long winner, and you have the race winner. So I don't know, but I want to say since Stewart won his championship and race, that's when NASCAR was like, we need to make this be what is the championship. So what is some other evidence against this, Mark, in your opinion?
There really isn't any evidence against this. Like a lot of people argue this makes a lot of sense. A lot of pundits and team members and people have kind of hinted that this is a thing that happens. But the only other one we have is, James, when you and I were at Homestead in 2019, Austin Hill won the truck race, but he was not in the championship 4. Matt Crafton won the championship. He finished 4th, I believe, and actually didn't win a race all season, which was incredible. He won the championship. And so that's really the one time where you've had the non-champion win the race. So it does happen. And there was a victory lane for Austin Hill, and there was a victory lane and championship celebration for Matt Crafton, which I didn't see the broadcast because I was at the race. So I don't know what it was like on the broadcast, but we were used to having that, right? Like Greg Biffle won the Homestead in 04, 05, and 06 and wasn't eligible for the championship in any of them because he was too far out. And we had a victory lane for him and we had a championship celebration. Now it's all kind of become this one thing. And watching Phoenix last year, it really was just all we talked about were those 4 guys. And that was really, we didn't really know what was going on with any other drivers. Like they weren't even in the race. And those 4 cars were so much faster than everyone else. It was just, so I started asking around and couldn't really get anything concrete. And people say, I think they just, maybe they get away with a little more aero, maybe, things like that, because they kind of want that narrative. So I'm going to go on a limb here, James. I'm going to say that I think this could be true. I think this has a lot of evidence to support it. So like, did Larson really fade that bad in 2017 at the end after having the dominant car? Did Jeff Gordon have a loose wheel with so few laps left in 2015 and have to pull off the track?
I mean, the thing is, it's like everyone's performing, I think, at their best. And you think to how much time like certain crew chiefs have to think and massage with that Homestead car. Like, I honestly think back in the day when this was the true, like, oh, we had to focus on Homestead. And even still today, I think it's true with focusing on Phoenix. Crew chiefs, crew members, they build and prepare that Phoenix car and they push it to the side. It's never going to run a race. It's just one car with one mission. And they just keep adding little things they learn here and there. So I feel like to them, that's like their best piece. I don't feel like everyone else comes with that piece. You know what I mean? I feel like some teams do because they're just like, we want to swing for the fences. And sometimes they just overdo it. So I genuinely think it's the 4 best cars trying to win the race. And everyone else is trying to also bring their best piece too, to try to knock them down. But also we spoke about, manipulation within teams. If you have a 4-car team and your other 3 drivers aren't in the playoffs, all the resources, all the minds kind of go towards the other car because it's one team, one mission. That's always the narrative with multi-car teams. So I think that also comes into play. I don't think it's like one of those, like, it's a conspiracy theory. I think this is something you got to take pride in. The 4 best out there competing for the championship. I think that's great. It did my heart well to see Jeff Gordon run up there into 2015 when I was there at Homestead, because that was just amazing to see as a fan. Like, I was like, man, he could win this race. And then he faded. And it just happens. Like, these are endurance races, long marathons. It doesn't matter what track you're at. When you're driving that long, conditions change. And in NASCAR, the narrative of tires, geez, like, look at what was it, 2019, when Hamlin Truex put the wrong tires on one side, as his crew did. Like, a simple mistake like that messed up their race.
Yeah, and now people think that like Gibbs paid them to do that. That's another one we could have done. Another conspiracy theory, right? That it was faked and they screwed front row or furniture row or whatever, or screwed the one team for the other team. I don't know. It's just craziness.
It just happens though. But like, the point is, like, just even like a mismatch set of tires, like just having the codes just be that much off, or having a tire equalize, or just that plays into effect too. So I think that's another thing you also see too, is like the bartering between the tire guys. Like, the tire guys for the top 4 teams are going to try to get the best tires they can get. And since you have depth too with an organization, you're going to also have that manipulation. Like, hey, just give them the best set. It's whatever. So I think it's not, I don't think it's like a conspiracy theory that there is. It's just evident. But, also to that point, I feel like it's not a bad thing, because then you also have other teams when they are performing well in those races, like Kyle Larson did, and like Greg Biffle would do back in the day. Like, it showed that those teams were legitimate and good. And, if you put them in the right places at the right times during the season, maybe to not fall down the ladder so much, they could have been in the championship conversation. So yeah, makes me want to see a full season championship again.
Yeah, same.
Like, so much fun.
I think this theory has some merit, though. I think it probably has some of the most merit of any of the ones on this list. Definitely like the most one that could be the most true, because I don't even think that would really bother that many people if they just like let those cars have the Days of Thunder gears, and they're like, wow, it's better if one of them wins, like,
or just accept it.
Even the other drivers, like, you probably don't want to be involved in like knocking a championship guy out of the race. You don't want, you don't want to be that guy either. So yeah,
Ernie Irvan.
But we'll So James, why don't you take us to the next one on our list?
All right. The next one is an oddly controversial one, but it has as much merit as many conspiracy theories as the president involved with it. So Richard Petty's 200th win on July 4th, 1984. That's right. NASCAR racing on July 4th. The Cup Series was at Daytona, NASCAR's track, Big Bill's track, for the Firecracker 400. Now, if 4th of July weekend and NASCAR isn't just patriotic enough, why don't we have Air Force One flying in during the race with President Ronald Reagan aboard? Also, he gave the command from Air Force One. Just no big deal. I guess we have the technology, Mark, to have a live broadcast in the air and a president calling down to the ground while he's flying in the air. Yet we can't use our cell service on the phone, on the plane. I don't get it. Anyways, so Reagan flies in, big celebration. He's up there, he's shaking hand, kissing babies, trying to get reelected. So he's doing his campaign rounds. This is a stop to help him on his tour. And Richard Petty and Cale Yarborough come down to battle for the lead in the final couple of laps. A caution comes out. The race is going to end under caution. The leaders race back to the white and yellow flags. And Richard Petty narrowly edges out Cale Yarborough just by a nose to capture his 200th NASCAR victory. Of course, the race ends under caution, but it's 1984. Who cares? We just witnessed the king finally reach 200. So, a lot of detractors like to say that this was kind of cooked up, that all this battling was meant to just draw up the hype. Cale Yarborough was in on it. He let Petty win. NASCAR also could have not thrown the caution. NASCAR could have let the leaders race because the car that had spun, Doug Hevron, he was off the track. Wasn't in the racing line. They could have just kept racing. But no, NASCAR threw the caution. So is that the conspiracy, Mark? Do people think that they wanted this to stick while President Reagan was also in attendance, knowing that NASCAR could get a boost of popularity?
Well, let's look at the supporting evidence here, James. Petty had a really good car, a very good car. So before the first caution came out around lap 60, I think he had about a half a lap lead. This is before restrictor plates. So he was just gone. Also, Richard Petty campaigned for Ronald Reagan in North Carolina in 1980 and 1984. So he endorsed Ronald Reagan for president. He also didn't go to victory lane right away when he won the race. He went up to the suites to celebrate with Ronald Reagan and eat KFC with him. So he went to victory lane and did the photos afterwards. And then the biggest piece of evidence people point to is that Richard Petty never won another race after that. That was his final win, his 200th. So,
dang.
Did they cook this one up and then he was just never good enough to win again? Who knows?
I don't know. You know what, Mark? The more we talk about it, and the more I talk in this tone, the more I want to believe that this could be true. Except, you know what? I've always pops up in my head. Petty could have had 201. Because wasn't it earlier than that year? I believe it was the Coke 600. Petty was disqualified for having too big of a motor after winning that race. So he could have had 201, and we could have been like, wow, look at Richard Petty, went over 200 in front of Ronald Reagan. Guess what? The narrative would have still been the same. Richard Petty would have went up and hung out with the president, made face for the PR hoopla for both of them. Obviously, for Richard Petty's image, that looks great because he's a stock car racer associated with the president, and the president is associated with the greatest stock car racer in all of the world, which then in turn influences his popularity amongst the people that love Richard Petty and people who know of Richard Petty, and therefore helps his campaign bidding in the Southeast. You know, I don't see why people need to make this a conspiracy theory. It happened. Like, it happened. And also races under caution. So evidence against it, basically. Petty basically beat Yarborough by the narrowest of margins, racing hard. I mean, they were literally beating and banging to the line. It was racing hard. And then also, Petty wasn't exactly washed up. Like we said, he almost won at Charlotte, but he also won 2 other times in 1984. Okay, this was just, unfortunately, when you the time the stop winning happens, it just happens. Most drivers can't like say they see it coming. Like it just happened. And then eventually Richard Petty would go on one of the most, it's safe to say, dismal points of his career when he couldn't like qualify in for races. And then we had the championship provisional invented. And yeah, I mean, but you know what, that's the thing. People have that to support this and say, oh, it's a hoax. You know, he had to win that last race there. It's like, oh, is it a conspiracy theory that he won his 6th Daytona 500 when Cale Yarbrough or Donnie Allison and Cale Yarbrough went spinning down the back straightaway? Was that a conspiracy? No, that was just hard racing that led to Richard Petty's favor.
Yeah, I think this conspiracy theory doesn't really hold any water because like he won 5 weeks before that at Dover. So
Yeah.
like it's and he still had good finishes the rest of the year. And like, yeah, we did unfortunately have to watch Richard Petty like putt around at the back till the end of his career because he stuck around probably longer than he should have, unfortunately. But racers want to race. So yeah, I just don't buy this one at all. I like, yeah, so what? He campaigned for Reagan. I'm sure half the field or 95% of the field voted
David
for
Reagan's
Reagan.
dad campaigned for Reagan.
Yeah,
he had Reagan for Reagan on the back of his car.
I'm sure that 95% of the NASCAR Cup Series field at that time voted for Ronald Reagan. So I can't confirm that, but that would be my suspicion. So yeah, this one doesn't really hold any water. It's just kind of a coincidence. And it happens, and coincidences happen. Ronald Reagan was there, and he happened to win. So
the conspiracy theory I've got to bring up is that they were not eating KFC chicken. They were eating Publix chicken. Come on, everybody knows Publix. They should have got Publix chicken. The best. Yeah. But then again, was KFC way better back in the day compared it to where it is today? Like,
I think the 11 herbs and spices have always been the same. KFC, if you want to give us some money for that, that'd be great.
Yeah, like you did Joe Nemechek back in 2005. Anyways, Mark, let's move on to the next one.
We're going to hop away from NASCAR. We're going to talk about Formula One. And this is a recent one. So the 2020 F1 season, if you watched last year, was unlike any in recent memory. Like obviously the pandemic kind of, bungled things up. They didn't start till July. There was double headers and they had to fit a whole season in 6 months. And it also had other effects. At the Secure GP in Bahrain, championship leader Lewis Hamilton had to miss the race. He'd actually already locked up the title because he had tested positive. So Mercedes opted to replace him with George Russell, who's a Mercedes contracted driver that drives for Williams, a team that Mercedes supplies engines to. Russell showed that he was the right man to do this. He replaced Lewis. He qualified second, and he took the lead in turn one. He was having a great race. And then Mercedes did a double stack pit stop on lap 63. So George came in first, and his teammate Valtteri Bottas came in after. George's stop was quick, and then Bottas had a dismal stop. They had to swap the tires multiple times due to a mix-up. A couple laps later, Russell had to come in again because he had the wrong tires on his car. Those tires belonged to Bottas's team. So that's illegal. So he had to switch the tires. Even after the unscheduled stop, Russell drove through the field. He was up in second place. He was closing the gap to Sergio Perez. He was only 2 seconds behind. But on lap 78, Russell was called into the pits again due to a slow puncture on one of his tires, which dropped him out of contention, and he finished 9th. Sergio Perez won the race. So what is the conspiracy theory? Well, a lot of F1 fans believe that the tire mix-up was intentional to hurt Russell in the race, leading to the second theory that there was no puncture on his tire. It was made up to ensure that he wouldn't win the race, which would embarrass the team as a new driver hopped in their car and immediately won a race. So what do we think about this? Well, there's some supporting evidence for it. Mercedes, first of all, would never makes mistakes like that. It's complete amateur hour to put the wrong tires on a car like that was for a different car. Like I get they were double stacking, but like still they've done that a million times. So that never happened before. Second, the other argument is, well, Mercedes didn't want Russell jumping in their car and winning the race right away because it would only further the misconception that Lewis Hamilton isn't good. He just has a good car because anyone can drive it and win. Thus, they made up the story about the puncture and brought him in so he wouldn't win. So interesting theory. Not sure I buy it because there's lots of evidence against it. So
Yeah, I mean, basically, if Mercedes was concerned that Russell would make Hamilton look bad, why did they put him in the seat for the race anyways? Why not just like pull the program out?
They
Why
could have
not
put
even
like
just
any driver in there.
yeah? Why not
Like,
put their GP2 their F2 driver in there? Why not do that? Why not just put another test driver in there?
yep, exactly. They could have put Stoffel Van Dorn in the car as their Formula E driver. F1, he's a super license. So why couldn't they just put him in the car if they're worried Russell's going to make them look bad? I don't know. It just makes sense.
Yeah. Next, why would you have why would they have sabotages Russell's race? I mean, basically, he's contracted through Mercedes and is going to be 100% with that team. I mean, why would you screw someone over basically?
Yeah.
Publicly, like
And
literally.
that's the thing.
Like,
It's like he's going to be in that car next year. So like, why would you? I
yeah,
don't want you to win yet. Make Lewis look bad. Like what?
we want to test your loyalty.
Like why even bring him up at all then if you're worried he's going to make Lewis look bad? I don't know. It just doesn't make sense.
We need to see how much pain we can put you through if just in case. Like if just in case you're going to win this race and we have to have Hamilton win it to win the championship, we need to know, can we put you through that? Finally, if this was true, there's just too much here to like try to keep under hush hush and quiet, because too many people are involved. Therefore, you have too many people to start speaking out about this incident. So I don't know. Something would have been leaked by now, whether it be on a Reddit forum, whether it had been through like, WTF1, like someone would have brought this to light.
That's the thing. And people are like, oh, no. They just paid everyone off and they stay quiet. The guy that Tanya Harding hired to break Nancy Kerrigan's leg told someone he did it the next day at a bar. Like,
Yeah.
So, like,
but then again, these people are a little more loyal. But then again, we also live in an age where like, I don't know, I could have just hacked your phone and then, oh, look, these text messages back and forth about how you're going to Russell's over during the F1 race. Literally, you said the F word right there.
That's the thing. It's like
to your team principal
hack into anything, like unless you pulled everyone aside and said everyone put your phones on airplane mode and you told them in person. Like, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. Like it doesn't hold any water. Like, yeah, emotionally at the time, I was like, oh, they did that on purpose, because they screw Valtteri Bottas over a lot. I think they purposely do crap to him. I don't, but again, there's no evidence. So yeah, that's an interesting one, but it's not the only time F1's going to appear on this list. But James, we have to talk about another open wheel series for this next one.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the IRL. I am Indy.
Because I am Indy.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, Gene Simmons, when you came in, you added so much value, just so much value to IndyCar. Beautiful. That's why they have a network deal and NASCAR doesn't right now. Beautiful. Anyways, in 1996, of course, the creation of the IRL happened. This was when IMS president Tony George formed the Indy Racing League to be the new American open wheel series. Now, of course, the biggest thing Tony had was the Indy 500. Over the past couple of years, the Indy 500 was a part of the kart schedule, but really wasn't a kart sanctioned event. It was, I believe, USAC.
Yeah.
USAC. Always awesome. USAC was the event organizers and the principals at that event. So you weren't under kart rules, you're under USAC rules coming into the Indy 500. And then there was a whole debacle about it. Basically, Roger Penske, Chip Ganassi, and a bunch of other team owners said, screw it, we're not going to do this. We're going to keep kart doing its thing. And it created this big split that made the IRL basically not just Americans open wheel series, but America's oval open wheel series. So what's the conspiracy theory? Well, the split into two separate series basically caused the popularity of open wheel racing in America to decline so sharply. And this was also at the time when NASCAR was in its peak popularity. And NASCAR was on the cutting edge and on the way up, while IndyCar, even though it was cutting edge, was on the way out. So fans believe that Bernie Eccleston and Bill France Jr. were kind of in cahoots to be in communication with Tony George, telling him, hey, man, you need to just take the Indy 500 and make your own thing, your own series that competes with kart, which would lead to the inevitable popularity of NASCAR and Formula One in North America. Mark, I don't know about you. That sounds like some bull.
I don't know, man.
Bull.
It's a lot of evidence to support it. Let's talk about it. So,
Okay, so let's go into some evidence here.
all right, due to the split, so IndyCar racing in America, as you mentioned, fell out of favor. Racing fans just didn't want to follow two different series or couldn't figure out which one they wanted to watch, so they just went and watched NASCAR. We talked about that in our Walt Disney race review as well, went into detail on that. So NASCAR had sold out races, they had TV ratings off the chart, and nobody was going to IRL races or kart races. So maybe Bill France Jr. had an idea that this could happen, and if he crippled US open wheel racing, maybe, you know, his series would get a boost, and that's exactly what happened. So that's one. Two, kart's on-track product was incredible. They had amazing cars and amazing drivers, some of the best drivers in the world, and there were apparent supposed plans to expand the series internationally with more races in Canada, Australia, and even expanding into Europe. So maybe Bernie Ecclestone saw that as a threat to Formula One. And finally, kart had seen a migration of F1 world champions in the 1980s and 1990s. You know, Emerson Fittipaldi and Nigel Mansell both went to race in the US full time, and even Nelson Piquet committed to running several Indy 500s. Ayrton Senna also was rumored to be interested in kart, and he did test a car with Penske in the early 1990s. So was Bernie concerned that drivers would start leaving the political mess of the paddock of F1 to go to this ultra competitive kart series? That's some pretty damning evidence, James. So
it is, and Bernie Eccleston is the most shady man in all of motorsports.
He's a bit of a sociopath. He's an interesting man.
Yeah, rest in peace, Bernie.
He's still alive.
He's dead to me. Anyways, let's look at the evidence against this. Tony George basically had been disillusioned with kart for several years. The round table of kart and Tony George just didn't see eye to eye. And there are record incidences of him discussing that he had basically wanted to come up with this new series as early as 1992. And George had an idea of starting this Indy racing car series as soon as he became president of IMS. He didn't waste any time. He didn't need anyone to push him because he had a vision. And that vision was as simple as going back to the grassroots of American open wheel racing, looking at guys like AJ Foyt, Parnelli Jones, who came up from racing on dirt. There was no way for drivers to get there. Here's the biggest evidence. His name is Jeff Gordon. Open wheel racing lost Jeff Gordon because open wheel racing was too expensive for Jeff Gordon to participate in. Indiana boy who cut his teeth running on the dirts of midgets and sprints, eventually went to the woo, ended up going to NASCAR because he couldn't find a ride in open wheel racing. So this series was great for those drivers and to not lose those drivers to NASCAR. Next, all the F1 guys that jumped into kart were basically at the end of their careers. They still were in the prime of their career, Mark. And I will say this because when you're in Formula One, the pinnacle and to be at the top is different than being at the top of a lot of other series. So for these guys to come into kart, like like Emerson Fittipaldi had, he retired several years. He'd been retired. Then he gets into kart. Then you have Nigel Mansell. The guy is the reigning Formula One champion. He jumps into kart. But then again, this was in a time when Formula One had like all this technology in the cars. And if you weren't with like Williams or you weren't with the cutting. It was basically Williams, right? They were the one with the first with the advanced suspension technology.
Yeah, the active suspension and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you weren't with Williams basically in 92 and 93, you weren't competing. I mean, like that's what drove Senna to swap, because he was like,
And then when he went to Williams, they weren't allowed to run the active suspension anymore. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Because
Poor
of
guy.
the ultra politics of Formula One. Like Formula One just was shooting themselves in the foot. They didn't need to be like, oh, carts intruding on us because they're better series. It's like, maybe you should look within and see how much you suck right now, and how much you're destroying your own product by letting this competition gap be unregulated. And there is a fine line to when series have to jump in, but the regulations don't help. But yes, a lot of people believed even drivers like Senna would have made the jump to kart, and I believe so too. I feel like every great Formula One driver probably was, once they're at the end of their Formula One career, they probably all wanted to race kart, because kart was always appealing. It didn't need anything else to sell itself by. Drivers just liked it. The final supporting evidence against it is, why would Ecclestone want to cripple kart when F1 was just poaching top talent from that series? Like Jacques Villeneuve, he went to Formula One, and after winning the 1995 Indy 500 and a kart title, Juan Pablo Montoya later on, he would be poached to go to Formula One after he won the 2000 and Indy 500 and a kart championship. So it begs the question there, Mark, isn't all open wheel racing just helping each other out? And therefore, basically, this split caused by an ego war is much more believable than it being built up by two of the biggest people in motorsports at the time, trying to like feed information into Tony George's ear to like manipulate him.
Yeah. And it's like there's no evidence of this. It's like, yeah, so NASCAR started racing at the Brickyard. So there was a relationship between Bill France Jr. and Tony George, and F1 was racing there as well. But like, it just, why? Now, like you said before, Bernie Ecclestone's sociopaths. I don't know. Maybe he just was like, let's cripple American open wheel racing for no reason. But like, he got Villeneuve from there. He got Montoya from there. It doesn't make sense that they would do that.
Because
I don't know.
Because kart was not an American open wheel series. It was an open wheel series that raced in North America.
Yeah,
but
and they had like two American drivers. Everybody was international, like you said.
Yeah,
so,
and it was because these drivers couldn't afford to race Formula One. That's the whole thing about it. A lot of these drivers were really good, and a lot of them were ex-Formula One drivers. And to your point, Mark, yeah, a lot of them passed their prime. Like Mario Andretti is one of the best examples of a guy who probably proved to a lot of Formula One drivers, hey, you can come to American race kart. It's pretty fun. I'm enjoying it, and I'm having a lot of success. Look at me. I'm the face. And that's what every driver kind of wants. They want to be the face. When you're in Formula One and the competition level's so intense, you're one of the faces. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So this doesn't make any sense. Holds no water. I'm not going to support that one. But now let's jump to the world of sports car racing and talk about a topic that's not controversial at all. Let's talk about balance of performance. So BOP. If you aren't familiar with sports car racing series like IMSA, World Endurance Championship, whatever, you've likely never heard of BOP. So essentially in sports car racing, how cars from different manufacturers can race against each other is through a process called balance of performance, where they're adjusted through weight, power, and fuel capacity adjustments so they compete equally. And that's the way you always wonder, well, how can a Lamborghini Huracan race against a Lexus RCF? Well, they balance them so they can. And it sounds like a perfect system, but it's always shrouded in controversy. Essentially, the conspiracy theory goes like this. People believe that it's never fair on purpose. They believe manufacturers can lobby the series to make their cars faster so they'll win, whether it's passing them an envelope full of cash or other reasons. And they do that because if they win races, it helps their marketing effort. And a lot of series apparently would oblige this request. They'll take the bribe or whatever and make their cars faster. This is believed to be especially true if a manufacturer is considering leaving the series or their contract is up for renewal. the series will maybe let them win a bunch of times. So maybe they stick around. So yeah, what do we think about this one? Now, there is some supporting evidence and a little bit of evidence against. And from what I've heard, James, a lot of people have said this is true now, but I don't know.
Here's the thing. A lot of the supporting evidence makes sense because the evidence against BOP manipulation is basically centered around win on Sunday, sell on Monday. That mentality of having your brand be the top brand on track, translating to car sales, works. I mean, I think there's a Forbes article recently that goes into how IMSA recently has been one of the best activation proving grounds for car manufacturers in North America. It doesn't mean like North American specific manufacturers. If you want to be in the conversation in North America and really push your cars, he's activating IMSA. And who's activating right now? Hyundai, Lexus, Acura, and they're cars that have BOP that plays in their favor at times. You also have the big international stars like Lamborghini and Audi who are also working it in their favor too. And unfortunately, the elephant in the room that's been suffering is Corvette, but they're doing it. They're doing fine on their own. So a lot of that manipulation is kind of evident because if you look at who's spending the money to activate, that's also who's probably getting the success, whether it's podiums, fastest laps, poles, anything. It comes their way because of money being spent. And also, if you look at it, technically, it would make sense for a series like IMSA to give favorable BOP to manufacturers just for the sake of contract renewals, because it helps give the series more legitimacy when you have manufacturers behind it. I mean, if we look at World Challenge, I don't see manufacturers behind World Challenge like I see manufacturers behind IMSA. Much like when we looked at Trans Am, you had big manufacturers behind it. You had all the General Motor brands. You had Ford. You had Nissan as well. So those names add a lot of weight to your series. Supporting evidence against it, I mean, I don't know. How can we really prove anything against this?
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
Pretty evident.
You can't really prove it, and like it's all hearsay though. Like until you see a document that says, yes, we will pay you $1 million to make our cars faster. Like you can't really prove anything. And it's all kind of anecdotal. Like you can be like, oh, well, I think this happens because look, Acura was fast last year. And now this year Lexus is fast. And it's like, yeah.
Was it Acura? Did Acura spend any more money other than their Mid-Ohio race for activation?
Did they activate more? Did they buy more stuff from the series? Did they sponsor more things? Right. So you could argue that, yeah, maybe there's one hand washes the other type situation in many different sports car series, but who knows, right? But this is something that, drivers, of course, will always say is definitely happening. That, and people will joke about crew members. I had a tweet one time where I was like, oh yeah, Parker Chase won the race. And then someone commented, yes, but it's important to note he was driving a Hyundai because they're way faster than everyone else. It's just things like that. So people are always going to believe that this happens.
It does. And it's interesting how the paradigm has shifted a little bit now in that regard. Because I feel like some of the smaller brands like Hyundais, for example, when you have brands like that it's like the Motorsports is a very small finger for them. It's like their pinky basically. But that pinky fuels those other 4 fingers. And yes, I'm counting the thumb as a finger at the moment, because with all of that, it just adds value to the brand because you can take things from motorsport and just always put it back into the road car. And I feel like Hyundai is like one of the brands right now that's really doing that for a feel standpoint. I feel like their cars feel better than a lot of other cars. Like you see TRD and Toyota doing stuff like that, but it's not as you're only seeing that translate back into the TRD stuff. I feel like the really cool technology they find in motorsports, like their hypercar technology, like their LMP1, the stuff, it's all going to Priuses and cars like that, which is cool.
Mhm.
I think that's dope because that helps fuel that market for sure. Makes me want to buy a Prius. That's right. I'd buy a Prius over a Tesla because a Prius went on, not a Tesla. So Mark, we good on that one? That one we feel like
I think we feel pretty good. I think
evident.
that's it holds a bit of water. I think that that probably happens.
It happens. I mean, it does. It's like I've even had it expressed too, like from brands that work in Major League Baseball. It's like you got to pay to play. Like you can be associated with something, but unless you're paying big bucks, you're not going to get the coverage. So
Yep.
that's same thing on, you can be number one on the track, but if you're not spending the money to market, they're going to not like that too. So got to give back, it's like a mob boss. You know what I mean? It's
Come
like
to me on
it's
the
like
day of my daughter's wedding. Yeah.
I knew it was you.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's more like Scarface, I'd say, because we just want to make it look cooler.
Well, we have one that kind of ties into that sort of story coming up shortly, but yeah, James, why don't you take us to the next one, and then we'll go to the crazy one at the end.
Oh, this one's kind of Scarface-esque, so let's talk about this one. Let's talk about Jeremy Mayfield and that drug test that he had. Now, I mean, there's another conspiracy theory we can talk about a drug test too, Mark. I mean, Tim Richmond, come on. What do you think about that one? Just really quick.
Sorry, hit me again on that one, Mr.
The Tim Richmond drug test. You know about that one?
I actually don't. I'm not familiar with that one.
Okay, so I don't know exactly what he tested positive for, but here's the scoop. Tim Richmond was going to make his last ever NASCAR start, basically in the 1988 Gatorade duels, or not Gatorade duels, to me, the 1988 Bud Shootout. So the Busch Clash. He was going to start in the Busch Clash because he had won a pole in 87 in that limited schedule he was running.
Gotcha.
So he was going to run that race. It was going to be his final hurrah. And there was even talks with himself and people close to him that he would end it all right there. Like that was the way Tim Richmond was going to go, right in a blaze of glory. NASCAR had not been keen on Richmond for a while, and they did not like how he was hiding what he was hiding. And NASCAR basically wanted to like find a way to make sure he couldn't get onto the track. So they made him take a drug test. This was a drug test that was flown to California, analyzed in a lab, and then the results were given back. And NASCAR said that Tim had tested positive in that drug test. I believe it was kind of like testing positive for over-the-counter aspirin, like a high-powered aspirin. Like he wasn't like tested positive for a specific drug. But whatever drugs he was on were trying to keep him alive at that point because we all know he had AIDS. So the conspiracy theory here is that NASCAR falsified that drug test. And here's the supporting evidence. Tim took a drug test the day after. The results came back after the Busch Clash, or actually the morning of the Busch Clash. And they found that Tim had tested negative. Clean bill of everything. So that's the big conspiracy theory, that NASCAR blacklisted Tim Richmond from trying to make his final start, and also that Tim Richmond was going to go out in a blaze of glory in his final start.
Wow, that sounds very familiar to the one that you're about to tell us about. So.
Yeah, there's a good little thing I think NASCAR History Man and Brock Beard did on it. So check that out on YouTube. It's pretty cool. So Jeremy Mayfield and his infamous drug test. At the time, Mayfield was kind of in the prime of his career, maybe fading towards the end of his prime. He was one of NASCAR's top stars as a young gun throughout the 90s and became a really wily veteran in the early 2000s. Being known as that guy, he could always win a race every year. He could get your car in the top 10 and have good, strong finishes and be a good face for the team because he was Jeremy Mayfield and everybody knew who he was. He drove for owners like Roger Penske, and of course, Ray Evernham. And Mayfield even raced. He was able to win 5 Cup Series races. Like I said, kind of that guy. He'd win almost once a year. We all know him infamously for Mayfielding his way into the inaugural chase in 2004. He also won in 2005 at Michigan, which helped him secure a spot in the 2005 chase. But unfortunately, he would not qualify in 2006. 2006 was a very, very tough year. He had no top 10s. He was outside of the top 35 points, uncharacteristic for Mayfield, especially for the fact that his teammate at that time, Casey Kane, was on a career run and basically won every single race at an intermediate track. Inevitably, Ray would let Mayfield go. And that was a big swap because there was that whole change where David Gilliland got moved up to the Cup Series to drive the number 38. And then Elliott Sadler moved over to drive the 19 for Ray Evernham. But with all those moves, Mayfield was basically out of a ride for the remainder of the 2006 season. He would get a ride in 2007 with Bill Davis Racing, driving the number 32, I believe it was, or 36 OTC Toyota, which was interesting at the time. But of course, Mayfield's career was just not where it needed to be. He would drive for Haas the next season before Haas became what it was with Tony Stewart and just wasn't there. So in 2009, he starts his own team. He has some success making the Daytona 500, making several starts, but was randomly selected for a drug test following the Richmond race and failed that subsequent drug test and actually tested positive for methamphetamine, which he has denied even to this day. He also claims that he was taking a prescribed Adderall that was basically an over-the-counter allergy medication cocktail. So he was prescribed this Adderall plus taking something like, Allegra. And those two things together created the false positive. But NASCAR has this list of substance abuse items. At this time, I don't think it was available to the public still either. But they did confirm that the two things, the prescribed Adderall and the over-the-counter allergy medication, were not on that banned substances list. So the conspiracy theory here is fans believe wholeheartedly that Mayfield was set up, that this drug test was just to falsify him, to get him suspended and end his NASCAR career. And there's a list of supporting evidence.
Yeah. There's a massive list of evidence for this one.
It just continues to grow, I think, since like 2009 when this initially happened. Since like the 12 years since this happened, I feel like this list keeps getting bigger. So one thing Mayfield claims, and he'll claim to this day, have you ever seen a meth user, what a meth user look like? Especially what a meth user's teeth looks like, because Mayfield does not have a meth user's teeth.
Yeah. And you don't use meth recreationally. It's highly addictive. You don't just do it one time. You do it once and you get addicted to it. So yeah.
You can be someone on meth. You could be on meth and just be normal. Like, people hide their addictions. So I don't know. Next up, NASCAR's doctors knew about his prescribed Adderall and Claritin medication. So if they knew about it, they obviously could have known that he was going to fail this drug test if it was going to create a false positive, or they could have just known about it and administered a different kind of drug test. I mean, there is a lot of different ways to go about it. So NASCAR performed a second drug test, and they passed that on to an independent lab, which was a LabCorp. They do all our blood work and drug tests, don't they? And that was just located an hour away. NASCAR dismissed the LabCorp's test, which was ridiculous, as they are one of the largest and most used labs for drug testing and analyzing of specific human bodily things. So, and that's not only in the corporate world, but that's also in the sports world. Like, everyone uses LabCorp. So why would NASCAR just dismiss this? This sounds kind of like Tim Richmond a little bit again.
This next one, James, my absolute favorite piece of supporting evidence. And it kind of came out in 2018. Mayfield was right about everything. He ended up being right about everything he said in every interview in regards to Brian France, the man who had him suspended. So he said in 2009, when he was suspended, that Brian France suspending him for drug use was, quote, the pot calling the kettle black. And in 2018, France was arrested for impaired driving and possession of oxycodone, a powerful painkiller that he did not have a prescription for. So did he know about France being a drug user back in 2009? Because he made that comment. So maybe. So that's interesting.
That's interesting. I think if it's pretty evident, you can see that Brian France has lived a hard life, especially with alcohol. I don't think this is like, that was his first DUI either. That was just like his first DUI where he actually got busted with his oxycodone on him.
And world travels, there's no secrets in the NASCAR garage. So people might have known about things that had been going on. And, you know, Mayfield even said, he's like, I don't wish any ill will on Brian France now. And I hope he, you know, gets help for his problems and whatnot. But it's just kind of ironic that I would get suspended for drug use by someone who is, you know, behind closed doors doing these things himself. Secondly, Mayfield was also right when he said that the reason his team's performance fell off in 2006 was due to his team owner, Ray Evernham's relationship with his contracted development driver, Aaron Crocker. Well, he and Aaron Crocker are married now and have children. And that relationship caused Evernham to be less and less involved in the team. And if you know anything about Ray Evernham, he was highly involved in the development of his team's race cars. He was there all the time. He's one of the greatest crew chiefs in NASCAR history. So he ended up selling a majority stake of the team to the Gillette Group in 2008. So wasn't really involved anymore. And he also said that Casey Kane's team got all of their cars. All the good cars went to Casey Kane's team because they were really focused on their young driver, Casey Kane, being the next big thing. So he also mentioned in an interview that Dale Earnhardt told him in the year 2000 to save his money because when Brian France takes over the sport, he's going to run it into the ground. And NASCAR popularity has unfortunately been declining since the mid-2000s. Was he right about that? Who knows? Did that conversation actually take place? But it's an interesting tidbit, so I figured I'd throw it in here. So yeah, Mayfield's kind of been right about everything.
He has, and the way they've covered it up just doesn't really make sense because NASCAR just seems to have left a lot of evidence out there for people to kind of pick up the pieces and figure things out further. I'm not saying people should. I'm just saying like there's definitely more evidence, and as time has gone on, it's just continued to have cleared Mayfield's name. I remember Mayfield even made a documentary about this whole thing. So, you know, it's kind of a benefit because the evidence against it, basically, you know, what benefit is there to Brian France for framing Jeremy Mayfield? I mean, what does that get out of it? I don't think there's a framing issue here. I don't know if like there could have been a personal thing between them, and basically all Brian France gets is just like the satisfaction of Jeremy Mayfield's name being destroyed. Because let's be honest, Jeremy Mayfield is never going to be in the Hall of Fame. Jeremy Mayfield is never going to be remembered and accoladed by NASCAR other than for what he did in 2004, because Brian France wants to write the narrative. And Brian France wrote the narrative with the chase. Therefore, he's a part of Brian France's narrative right there. And that's the cruel irony of all this, is that Jeremy Mayfield may never be remembered for his entire career, but just those moments where like he rooted Earnhardt out of the way. and at Pocono, how he played through the pain in 2000 at Fontana and won that race. And of course, making the chase in 2004 by winning the race at Richmond. And that's all Jeremy Mayfield will be remembered for, because I don't know, his whole legacy has been tarnished trying to fight this too much.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I read franchise.com's article about, do we all owe Jeremy Mayfield an apology? Because people, and he got arrested in 2012 as well for some theft charges that I guess he ended up being cleared of, or he put in an Alford plea or something, and he got out of serving any time for those, but he still maintains innocence in that. And there's more to it that we didn't go into, where he claims that NASCAR is in cahoots with the cops to try and frame him further, but it's very convoluted. We don't really want to go into all of that. So
yeah, because all it does is just, it supports more or less that claim of him being a user. And that's the thing. There's like enough claims out there to support both sides of this. And that's why it's, up for interpretation. But if the facts are the facts, like Jeremy Mayfield's legacy in NASCAR has truly been destroyed. And it's honestly been destroyed by continually trying to fight this, because as it's been shown, as time has gone on and like Jeremy Mayfield has become less and less relevant to this topic, more things have come out to say, hey, he was right.
Yeah. So
like, I don't know, maybe in like 25 years after this whole fiasco, probably in like 2024, or 2034, maybe he'll get like exonerated from all this stuff.
I hope so.
If NASCAR's still around.
Yeah.
I don't know. Cause it's I don't know. He was a star at the time, man. He was like a face for a manufacturer. He was Dodge's face, because like that young upstart couldn't do it. And then he had to be associated with Bill Elliott. And then Bill Elliott was the old guard. And then Mayfield was the young guy. Remember? With like Atwood kind of like failing out of that Abraham deal. So like, yeah, he just like erased history. You know what I mean? Like he didn't exist.
Yeah. And then people look back at him now and they make jokes and they talk about how he wasn't a very good driver. I'm like, he won 5 races. Like he had 96 top 10s. He finished in the top 10 every 4 races. Like, yeah, how's that not good? I don't get it. But yeah, we all owe Jeremy Mayfield an apology. And like, that's one that I think makes a lot of sense. I think you could argue those tests were falsified just because the LabCorp test is so damning. It was negative right after NASCAR did their test. So he actually like peed in 2 cups at exactly the same time. And one went to them and one went to NASCAR. And they came back with separate results. Like, come on, that's interesting.
And it just supports Tim Richmond's case too.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah.
Now we're going to go to the final one, James. And this one is the most outlandish and incredible. And I believe it 100%. So thank you to NASCAR Man History, who actually suggested this on the thread. I'd never heard about this before, and then he suggested it, and I did a boatload of reading about it because it's fantastic. We're going to talk about Colin Chapman's death? ? Colin Chapman was an automotive designer, inventor, and entrepreneur, best known for being the founder of Lotus Cars in 1952. So he formed Team Lotus in the late 1950s to race in Formula One, and over the next 2 decades, the team would win 7 constructors titles and 6 World Drivers Championships with drivers like Mario Andretti. Outside of Formula One, Chapman was involved in many different automotive projects. In 1978, he became involved with American tycoon John DeLorean in the development of the rear-engined aluminum DeLorean sports car, still to me one of the coolest cars of all time. Unfortunately, Chapman died of a heart attack on December 16th, 1982, the same day that Lotus tested the first ever Formula One car with active suspension. So what's the conspiracy theory? Well, James, Colin Chapman's not dead. He faked his death. In 1982, John DeLorean was charged with cocaine trafficking by the US government after an FBI sting operation. But what does this have to do with Chapman? Well, in 1981, Lotus Group's accounts were far overdue, and they weren't released until after his alleged death in 1982. They showed Lotus had accepted payments for engineering work done for DeLorean through a Swiss-based Panamanian company run by a DeLorean distributor. Fishy.
A lot of cocaine comes out of Panama, man.
Yeah, in a Swiss account from Panama. And if you know anything registered in Panama usually isn't legit. So Interesting. Now, Chapman, of course, died before any of this was found out. But at the trial, Lotus's accountant, Fred Bushell, was confirmed to have funneled 5 million British pounds of the funds to himself. And the judge also declared that Chapman had not died. And had he been indicted, he would have faced at least 10 years in prison. So, did Colin Chapman fake his death? Well, there's some damning evidence to support this, James.
Yeah, there is. First off, this makes anyone want to fake their death. When you're going to face a long-term prison sentence for being involved in money laundering, you can get like a little bit of time off on that, but you're going to a very, very tough prison. So that's, yeah, I would fake my death for that. Here's another one. He was questioned by the British authorities before his death.
Like right before his death, like a couple days before. Yeah.
Yeah. He's on to you. They probably told him, oh, by the way, don't leave the country. Oh, he left the country. All right. He left the planet. Next, the British government actually believed this could be true and spent time looking for him in Brazil during 1983, believing he had fled to the South American country. Now, his wife had traveled there and stayed for over a month after the Brazilian Grand Prix, which raises some eyebrows because she hadn't flown or traveled outside of England in over a decade.
She was deathly afraid of flying.
Ooh. Next, the only people that saw his body were his wife and his doctor that signed on his death certificate. There were no independent people to review it. So, what body was there? Was it the body of someone else? We don't know. Now, the final one. He had a rushed funeral with only close family. Oh.
Yeah, it was like 2 days after his death.
This is a big figure in motorsports. You gotta celebrate the man's life. He worked with John DeLorean on the car that you had to massage with hair fibers because it's made out of aluminum. So space age, cutting edge. Why does this guy only have a private funeral, and why is it just so blown off? Why is there no attention drawn to it?
Because there's no body in that casket, James. That's why.
Why didn't they just cremate him?
Yeah, there's no body in that casket. So let's talk about some evidence against this. Well, first off, faking your death is a hell of a thing to pull off and even attempt. Like, to lay low for that long. But man, there's fugitives that have been on the run for like 30 years that nobody's ever found. So it could happen, you know. A lot of people involved in Germany in the 40s fled to South America and we never found them again. So interesting. But my big one against this, although like this is, I don't know, it's pretty damning. Like this one's fun to believe actually happened. But 10 years in prison for somebody as rich as Chapman probably wouldn't have been a big deal. Like he would have gone to rich guy prison, you know, where they have tennis courts and like, you know, it's like a spa. He likely would have had his sentence reduced, paid a bunch of fines, and he was only 54 at the time. So even if he serves all 10 years, he would have got out his mid 60s and had another 30 years ahead of him. So, you know, that's really the only evidence against this though. So
here's the thing. Was he ever featured on Unsolved Mysteries? Because if he was, he probably would have been found by now.
Yeah,
they find
Robert
everybody
Stack
on
had
that
done
show.
a thing on him. Yeah, he would have been found. But the biggest piece of evidence to me is why did his wife go to the Brazilian Grand Prix and stay for a month? She never went to F1 races. She didn't like to fly. She hadn't left England in 10 years. Now you could argue, well, maybe she went because he's not around anymore and she went to watch the team. But staying for
just
a month,
the Brazilian Grand Prix.
Some people believe he during that time was getting like his fingerprints changed and getting plastic surgery done. And this gets made fun of in a lot of different shows, like people running away and getting plastic surgery. And it's all kind of based on like this death faking thing. So yeah, man, I'm 80% there on this one. Like this, it just seems like it could be true.
I feel like it's easier. Well, first off, when you're not the face of the team or an organization, and you're one of those people behind the scenes that's really key to success, it helps because a lot of people don't know your face.
Mm-hmm.
So like You know, if this was modern time, yeah, there'd be like 1,000,001 photos of him. Like it'd be hard for him just to kind of just disappear. But like in the 80s, there's not as much connection to the world that people have. I mean, you could just pick up and go. So, you know, it seems plausible. But then again, it's hard for some people to stay low forever. I mean, if he's just in Brazil, I mean, come on, Brazil is not that big of a country unless he's just like way out in the middle of nowhere in Brazil, just like chilling.
I don't know, man. You could be hiding in plain sight. Like, how many people live in Brazil? I'm gonna look that up.
Oh, so does he own like an automotive shop in Brazil? Like he just
Yeah,
truly
like,
is
who
in plain
knows?
sight.
210 million people live in Brazil, James. So, you know, I think he could. I think he might. Like you said, he might own like a dry cleaners or something. You know, and
I don't
just
know. He's
live out his days not being in prison. Is there a statute of limitations on money laundering? You think he could like appear now? Although he'd be, how old would he be? In his 90s.
oh,
So
he would also have to do time for the evading of police too.
that's
So
true.
that doesn't help.
But
that
he was
that
never
hurts.
charged with anything.
Is the case still open?
No, so the case was put on hiatus in the early 90s by the FBI. So they closed it like for now, but yeah, so
they can reopen it.
They believe he's dead, but it's like, I don't know, man. That's interesting.
Well, how did he die specifically?
Heart attack. So he died of a heart attack. That's an easy one to fake. He was at home and he died of a heart attack. Okay.
Yeah.
No one signed the death certificate. Nobody saw his body other than his wife and the doctor. No,
there could be the other theory that he was whacked.
Rush. Yeah, that could be that as well. But the Rush funeral, like, I don't know, man.
That's another thing too, to support being whacked. You don't want anybody to see the body. What if you got shot up in the face?
True, but like, why would you cover that one up? Like, unless I don't know. Like, wouldn't you want people to know that like Buddy was murdered? I don't know.
No, because you don't want it to draw attention to, like, you know, oh, he was murdered. Now we have a murder investigation, and it's like, you know, you don't want your association to like be found out.
I don't know. It's an interesting one. I think that's pretty. I like that one a lot. That one is good. Thank you, NASCAR man, for that one. That could have its own documentary, like Colin Chapman's faked death, and that one actually has so much water. There's a lot of faked death conspiracy theories that don't make any sense. Like, people believe that, you know, that like Paul McCartney actually died in like 1965 or something, like, you know, stuff like that. But like this one, like, actually like makes a lot of sense. So
I think there's just enough supporting factors for it to be like, yeah.
Makes you think. That's the big one.
Yeah, I mean, it's there, but then again, it's like, I don't know. He would probably be dead by now, though.
So those are our 7 favorite motorsports conspiracy theories. Now, thanks again to NASCAR man for that last one, because that was amazing. But yeah, a lot of really cool ones. I got so many submissions, and we can only do so many. Like, this is going to be a long podcast. So, but it was fun to talk about. You know, it's always fun to talk about, you know, things that might be true and things that might not. So mysteries are fun to talk about. Like, I think we should have talked about how Bernie Ecclestone's actually the Lindbergh baby, you know, or, you know, some of the more outlandish ones, like Bernie Ecclestone got his money from the Great Train Robbery. That was one that somebody threw out there. Like, yeah, it's been widely debunked, but yeah, it was interesting. But it was a lot of fun, man. It was a lot of fun talking about it. Like, who doesn't love talking about conspiracy theories? Come on. It's one of the hottest podcast topics out there.
Yeah, I mean, other than murder mysteries.
Well, yeah, true crime is always going to be, you know, the top level of, that's what all my wife listens to. So if she wanted to murder me and
They
get
were
away with
friends.
it, she could.
Until they weren't, and a deadly outcome was drawn out because he was an artist. He was an illustrator. Get it? He drew it out. Next week on Flashback to the Track, we have murder, intrigue, but not incest. I don't know where we're going with that.
No,
but yeah, it was fun to look back at these conspiracies. Hopefully, people got a lot out of them. Hopefully, people don't subscribe to too many of them.
no. If you believe the Colin Chapman one, that's fine, because I believe that one too. So,
but I think that this was fun. I like the I always that cart split conspiracy because it's so outlandish. Because Bernie Ecclestone would never talk to Bill France Jr. That conversation wouldn't. Well, I don't know. It could have happened.
You never know, man. Like Bernie Ecclestone tried to get Jeff Gordon to come to F1 in 2004. So like, just because he knew ratings would be good, like he didn't care if he'd be good or not. He was going to pay for him
he
to
wasn't,
drive.
but he wasn't that far off when he tested Montoya as Williams, and the Williams like looking at that F1 car, it was like pretty push and go, like just go off with it. Like there wasn't as much technical feats to it like Senna in the 80s, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you had to really drive the car. Like it was pretty
and
we could technical.
We could have done Senna conspiracy theories. God, there's so many, but we can only do so many in this episode. So if you're watching on YouTube, let us know in the comments below what your favorite conspiracy theory is around motorsports, however outlandish. And if you're listening to us on whatever podcast app you're listening to us on, we're available on several. Please rate us and be generous. Give us the 5 stars. Come on. You enjoyed this. If you're still listening now, you listen to the whole thing. Come on. So give us the 5 stars. And we also have to take this time to thank Blue Emu once again for the support of this podcast and everything that we do on social media and whatnot. Be sure to check out James's stuff that he does with Blue Emu, like the maximum strength move of the race.
That's right. Vote every week on Twitter for your favorite move after the Cup race. And we'll find out on Monday who wins the maximum strength move of the race. Unless it gets rained out, then it might be on Tuesday. You just gotta equate.
James can't control the weather yet.
No, I don't think I ever will be. I think the weather, well, we are controlling the weather. The more we pollute, the more we get out of it.
Yeah, exactly. This is the coldest summer of the rest of our lives, folks. Get used to it. Every summer will be the coldest summer of the rest of your life. So thanks for everyone for listening. And that was a dark way to end it. But we will see you next time on the Flashback to the Track podcast.
See you in the next episode.